We grant the extension of time in respect of the finding of contempt in Leeds Crown Court and allow the appeal against that finding for the detailed reasons set out in the judgment, essentially because the process was flawed.
Good news, we're just waiting for Tommy to come out. We were in the press gallery. Surprise, we actually had a pro-free speech judge. I'm going to explain exactly what happened because we're just waiting for Tommy to come out. But essentially, the prosecution wanted to do a gagging order. They wanted to ban everybody, including Tommy, from discussing the case. But the judge said that no, this is a free speech country. He defended Tommy's free speech and said you're allowed to talk about it. There are a couple of conditions, obviously, very obvious conditions. This case is now going to the Southwark Crown Court. Tommy Robinson decided to go with that. He had an option to stay with the Magistrates Court, but Tommy wanted to have a jury. For the first time ever, Tommy is now going to be given a jury at the Crown Court in Southwark. So that's going to be the pre-trial. It's going to be on the 3rd of July. Tommy, I think, is coming out now. Obviously, we're going to hear him talk about what happened. But one of the key points, as I said, was the fact that the prosecution wanted to completely ban everybody from discussing this. The judge said, no.
The courtroom crackled with raw energy, a pressure cooker of anticipation as every pair of eyes locked onto Tommy Robinson. 4 years, the establishment had tried to muzzle him, to bury his voice under a mountain of legal threats and public vilification. They thought they could erase him, make him a footnote, ensure his words never reached the masses. But today, they miscalculated. The ruling that was about to drop would hit like a sledgehammer, not just shaking the nation but exposing the fault lines in a system desperate to control the narrative. This wasn't just a courtroom win, it was a middle finger to censorship, a raw declaration that free speech in Britain still had a pulse. The judge's gavel slammed down, not just breaking the silence but unleashing a storm that would tear through the corridors of power and ripple into every corner of public life. From the jump, the prosecution came in cocky, strutting like they'd already won. They pushed for a gag order, banking on the idea that silencing Tommy Robinson would be a cakewalk. Their playbook was clear: paint him as a menace, a walking spark ready to ignite chaos, violence, and danger to journalists. To them, free speech wasn't a right, it was a threat, a glitch in their carefully curated machine. They argued that any whisper of this case outside the courtroom would destabilize everything, that public discussion had to be crushed to protect the process. But the defense didn't blink. They didn't need theatrics or grandstanding. They let the facts do the talking. This case was already out there, videos shared, posts circulating, conversations buzzing across platforms. The law was crystal: citizens could speak their minds as long as the trial's integrity wasn't compromised. The prosecution's argument wasn't just weak, it was a flimsy excuse to strangle dissent. When the judge delivered the verdict, it landed like a thunderclap. The gag order was dead on arrival. In one swift move, the establishment's plan to suffocate Tommy Robinson's voice collapsed. The gallery erupted not in chaos, but in a fierce, contained roar of relief and defiance. Supporters clenched fists, some whispering yes under their breath, others exchanging looks of quiet triumph. Journalists from independent outlets scribbled furiously, capturing a moment that would echo far beyond these walls. Outside, the digital world lit up. Platforms like Rebel Media, Voice of Wales, and Urban Scoop went into overdrive, streaming live updates, sharing clips, amplifying the ruling to thousands in real time. Meanwhile, the mainstream press, those cheerleaders of control, were left choking on their own narrative, forced to tiptoe around a story they'd hoped to bury. This wasn't just a legal win, it was a Molotov cocktail lobbed at the heart of censorship. The ruling didn't just let Tommy Robinson speak, it handed him a megaphone to dismantle the system's lies. It was a warning shot: try to silence dissent, and you'll be exposed. The stakes were bigger than one man. A gag order would have been a green light to gag anyone: activists, whistleblowers, journalists, or just regular people with the guts to question power. It would have been a blueprint for control, a way to smother truth under the guise of public safety. But the judge's ruling flipped the script. Free speech wasn't just alive, it was a weapon, and the public was now armed with it. The prosecution's collapse was a sight to behold. Their smug confidence evaporated, replaced by hushed panic. Legal teams swapped nervous glances, phones buzzed with urgent calls, and strategies were shredded on the spot. Months of planning, undone in minutes. Their whole game plan, control the narrative, mute the man, dominate the story, lay in ruins. And Tommy Robinson? He stood taller, untouchable, ready to take the fight to the next level. Outside, his supporters weren't just a crowd, they were a movement. Flags waved, chants rose, not in chaos but in fierce unity. These weren't rabble-rousers, they were people who saw the truth, who'd watched the system try to crush a man for speaking it. Independent media captured every second, raw and unfiltered, while the mainstream outlets floundered, their cautious reports drowned out by the unapologetic truth-telling of platforms free from corporate leash. Then came the real gut punch. Tommy Robinson chose a jury trial. No more magistrates, no more backroom deals. 12 ordinary citizens would now hold the reins, untainted by political agendas or media spin. This was a seismic shift, a direct challenge to the establishment's grip. The prosecution's faces said it all, pale, shaken, their carefully laid plans unraveling. A jury meant unpredictability, a wildcard they couldn't control. It meant the people, not the elites, would judge the evidence. That terrified them. For years, they'd relied on quiet influence, on narratives shaped in newsrooms and boardrooms. Now, the game was out of their hands. The courtroom buzzed with a new kind of tension, not just from the ruling, but from what it unleashed. This wasn't just about Tommy Robinson anymore, it was about every citizen's right to speak, to question, to resist. The establishment's playbook, smear, silence, control wasn't just failing, it was being exposed. Independent media seized the moment, flooding platforms with raw footage, unfiltered analysis, and voices the mainstream had long ignored. The contrast was brutal. While alternative outlets reported with fire and clarity, the legacy media scrambled, tweaking headlines, softening their tone, trying to claw back a narrative they'd lost. Their buzzwords, controversial, provocative, felt hollow, exposed as flimsy attempts to sway opinion without facts. The political fallout was immediate. MPs and pundits, used to steering the conversation, were caught off guard. Tweets popped off, questioning the judge, the process, the risks of a jury. The irony was thick. The same people preaching fairness were terrified of citizens having a say. Behind closed doors, the machine kicked into gear. Strategists huddled, plotting new ways to spin the story, to nudge public opinion, to pressure platforms into compliance. But the ground had shifted. The gag order was dead, the precedent set, and Tommy Robinson's voice, along with the truth it carried, was free to reach the masses. This wasn't the end, it was the opening salvo. The Crown Court pretrial on July 3 loomed like a storm cloud, a clash where power would square off against principle. Tommy Robinson's choice to face a jury wasn't just tactics, it was a dare to the system, a demand that truth be judged by the people, not the powerful. Every word, every argument, every move would now play out in public, under the nation's gaze. This was no mere legal drama, it was a battle for the soul of free speech. The establishment, for the first time in years, was on its heels, and the nation was watching. The ruling's shockwaves didn't stop at the courtroom. It hit the streets, the feeds, the airwaves. Supporters outside weren't just cheering, they were claiming a victory for every citizen who'd ever been told to shut up. Independent media didn't just report, they amplified, giving voice to a movement that refused to be ignored. The mainstream press, meanwhile, was caught flat-footed, their cautious reports overshadowed by the raw, unfiltered truth pouring from platforms like X. Politicians scrambled, their carefully crafted statements betraying a quiet panic. The fear wasn't Tommy Robinson himself, it was what he represented, a crack in their armor, a reminder that control could be challenged, that one man with a voice could shift the tide. As the dust settled, the reality sank in. This wasn't just a win, it was a reckoning. The system's attempt to silence dissent had backfired, exposing its weaknesses to a public that was no longer content to be spoon-fed narratives. The jury trial loomed as a wildcard, a chance for ordinary people to weigh in on a case that was as much about freedom as it was about law. The establishment could scheme, spin, and strategize, but the spark had been lit. Tommy Robinson, once a target, was now a symbol, a reminder that truth, when fought for, could break through even the tightest grip. The fight was far from over, but for now, the people had spoken, and Britain's voice was a little freer.